So now we're going to move to the public hearing and adoption of the 2020 municipal budget. So you're going to have to guide me through this, Valerie, so I do it the correct way.
Okay, we need to open to the public.
I'll make a motion to open to the public.
Second.
So all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we're open to the public for questions on the municipal budget, and we have Paul Lerch here.
Yes, Mayor, I'm here, and Ralph Pacone from the office is here too. Mayor, can I just make a comment quickly?
Sure.
You let me know. I mean, what we've done in the past is when we opened to the public, we went through our brief slide presentation to try to just give an overview of the 2020 budget. And then what we can do at that point as we go through this, certainly if Mayor and Council has any questions, we could stop in the middle of it. But I think for the general public, especially the way we're doing it, we should wait till the very end, and then we can address any specific questions that either Lorraine doesn't want to or can't answer. 1 second, I just lost you guys there. Okay. And then we can go through it in that process.
Sure.
Okay. Lorraine or Ralph, were you going to put the slide up?
Yeah, Lorraine's going to do that.
I have it.
Okay. And so, Mayor, just a couple of overview comments. What's going to happen is that Ralph is going to go through the slide presentation. I'll certainly be here. He'll do that. But just from a global perspective, and what I've seen, obviously, this year dealing with many other communities, as we know, the real issue, obviously, here is the pandemic, COVID-19, and what it's doing to municipalities and their budgets, and the stress that it's putting on. I think that, you have to look at this from a global perspective. And what I mean by that, when I say that, is I look at your balance sheet and I look at your financial statement and how strong you are. Not every town is obviously, they're not all the same. Some communities do not have the cash reserves that you have. And when I say that, I'm really referring to the ability to survive and get through not only 2020, because the real problem is going to be 2020, you're going to get through, you're certainly going to have a loss of revenues. Everyone is. And the expense side is not going to be dramatic. I don't think so. But of course, the revenue side is going to be affected much larger than the appropriation side. So you're going to get through 2020, but inevitably what's going to happen is that 2020 results of operations are not going to be what we're normally used to. The dollar values, the amount that we lapse into surplus is not going to be at the sustained level that we had in the previous years. But when you look at the big picture, and I look at your surplus and your reserve balances, you are one of the most healthiest communities that I represent. So I think sustainability is going to come into effect, and it's going to bear out in 2021, because that's going to be the difficult year going forward. We're dealing with the loss of revenues, dealing with the loss of surplus. But I think you are particularly set well to be able to sustain this without any major disruptions financially. And that's the key. And not every community is going to be able to do that. But I think, I think you are set for that position to be able to weather the storm, if you will. So if anybody has any other specific questions regarding that, otherwise I'm going to let Ralph run through the budget presentation, and then we'll stay on to answer any particular questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ralph.
Okay, Lorraine, you can get to page 2 of the presentation if you don't mind.
How's that?
That's good. If you could just go down just a hair more. Perfect. So the first slide here is a breakdown of your revenues that you're anticipating in your current 2020 budget versus what was in the 2019 adopted budget. So the first category of surplus anticipated, we're anticipating almost $2.7 million in this budget, which is a pretty sizable increase over the prior year of about $700,000 more than what we had in the 19 budget. Just as a note, our overall surplus is up about $150,000 at 12/31/19 from the prior year. The next category, municipal revenue, is up about $43,000. The items that are in this category include licenses, fees and permits, interest on investments, construction code fees, court fines and costs. Basically, all your fees and permits and licenses are in here. The next category, state aid, is flat at $953,270, as it has been for probably the last 7 or 8 years. The next category, public and private revenue, of $585,422. This includes any state, federal, or county grants that you get, and it's offset with appropriations, so it's always offset and it doesn't have any tax impact. It is up pretty sizable from last year, about $231,000. It's mainly due to a new HUD grant and a new grant that we got from the New Jersey DEP in 2020. The next category, miscellaneous, of $182,719, is pretty flat from last year. The 3 items that are included in this category are cell tower rental fees, cable TV franchise fees, and fire prevention fees. Next, we have delinquent taxes of $850,000, which is the same as the prior year. That's any fees for taxes that weren't paid in the prior year. And then the last category, which is general taxation. This year, the tax amount being raised is $13,335,000, which in tax dollars is about $50,000 more than it was last year. But as we'll see later on, the tax rate is actually flat. The next slide just gives you kind of a pie breakdown of the revenues. And as you can see from the light blue area, general taxation makes up about 69% of our revenues. That's not uncommon for New Jersey municipalities of your size. It just shows that we're pretty heavily reliant on tax base. The next slide is the first cap that we have in the budget that we have to address. This is the tax levy cap. So each year you're allowed to go up by 2% your tax levy, with some exceptions. And also anything that you do not utilize gets banked and available for up to 3 years to be utilized in case of emergency and you needed to. The budget, as we saw on a prior slide this year, is using $13,335,000 of taxes. You actually could have gone all the way up to $15.2 million in taxes and still been within the state mandated cap. So you're right now about $1.9 million under the tax levy cap that you could have gone to, which just kind of shows the responsibility of the budget that you've got in front of you. The next slide goes through kind of a comparison of the spending in the various categories between 2020 and what we adopted in 2019. So the overall budget is up a little over $1 million to $19,441,110. The first category, general government, this includes items such as the mayor and council, administration, finance, the clerk, tax collection, legal, recreation, planning board. A lot of different categories go into this. It's a little over $2.8 million. It's pretty consistent with the prior year. The next category, insurance, which is $1,893,10, is actually down about $200,000 from the prior year. The reason is that there's a significant projected savings in our health insurance cost in 2020. So that was a good thing, and that's why we were able to lower that appropriation. Police services makes up about $3.7 million in our budget. That is up about 8% over the prior year. Fire and emergency services is $228,000, which is roughly $10,000 more than it was in the prior year. Police dispatch service is next at $455,000. Then we have public works of $2,081,121. That's actually comprised of 3 categories. That's the DPW itself, buildings and grounds, as well as vehicle maintenance services. You'll see that is up about $300,000, which seems sizable, but in 2020, your budget was actually a little bit of a change. We collapsed the park maintenance budget into the buildings and grounds budget. So that increase is a little high because of that reason. Next, we have solid waste and recycling of $1,448,000. We are up about $88,000 on our garbage and recycling contract. The next category is statutory and fixed charges of $1,829,871. There's really three items that make up that category mainly. That is the borough's contribution to the public employees retirement system, your contribution to the police and firemen's retirement system, and your contribution for Social Security. The next amount, public and private revenues, $585,422. As we mentioned on the revenue side, that's offset by the revenue, so there's no tax impact, and those were those two additional grants that mainly made that up. Next, we have debt service and capital improvements, $2,692,000. We are up $276,000, but it's actually kind of an increase in capital improvements of $550,000, where the borough has put significantly more money in capital improvement fund to fund ordinances. And then debt service actually went down $274,000 to get to the net increase of $276,000. And then the last category is the reserve for uncollected taxes of $1.7 million. That's a non-spending appropriation that you're required to have in your budget. And it's really for two reasons. One, because we know we're not going to collect 100% of our tax revenues in a given year. There's going to be some delinquents at the end of every year. And the second reason is that if there are any cancellations or tax appeals that are granted, the municipality has to take on 100% of that because the school and the county get all of their tax levy that they raise regardless of any cancellations or appeals that may take place. The next slide is just kind of a pie chart breaking down in a different format the different expenditure categories that we just went over. The next slide is the second cap that's in your budget, and that's the appropriation cap. You're allowed to go up to 3.5% each year in your budget spending inside the cap when you do a COLA ordinance, which I believe may be on the agenda tonight, or maybe it was at the last meeting. And whatever you do not utilize of that cap gets banked for up to 2 years and is available to be used. So in your budget this year, your cap spending is $14.2 million, but that's about $1.1 million less than what you could have gone into your budget and still been within the appropriation cap. Just sort of lends itself again to what I mentioned before about the responsibility of the budget that was put forth to the council. The next slide gives you a breakdown of the tax rate, and the school and county. At the time this was prepared, we don't know their rate and what it's going to be, so we just assume it's going to go up 2%, but it may not be that way. But our municipal tax rate is flat at 94.94. So at this point, there's no increase in the municipal rate. The next slide just sort of gives you a breakdown, a visual breakdown of where your tax dollars go. And as you can see, only about 28 cents of every tax dollar paid in Hopatcong goes for municipal purposes, and 52 cents goes to the school, and about 20 cents goes to the county. So about 3/4 of every dollar that homeowners pay do not go to support municipal appropriations. And then the last slide is just showing that the average home, what the effect of this particular budget is on the average home. The average home in Hopatcong is assessed at about $214,000, and that individual would pay $2,014 of taxes this year, which is the same as last year. And even though on an earlier slide, the actual levy went up about $50,000, our assessed valuation also went up in 2020, which is why the effective increase is 0 to the average homeowner. Be happy to answer any questions that anybody at mayor, council, or the public may have.
This is where we can ask questions?
Yes.
Okay. I have a couple. So you said the tax levy doesn't change from last year.
The actual tax levy dollar amount did change, but the tax rate did not change.
Right. Okay. Thank you. How much this year of the surplus are we using? Do we know yet?
Yes. So the first slide that we had up there the revenues, we're using $2,694,999 of our surplus is being utilized in this budget. And your overall surplus at year end was almost $6.3 million. So we used about 2.7 of the 6.3 available.
Oh, okay. So we had 6.3 at the end of 19, and we're going to be using 2 of that going forward in 2020.
2.7, correct.
I'm sorry, 2.7. Thank you. And do we know what that's being used for yet, or no?
Yeah, that's just one of the revenue sources in your budget. So it's not specifically identified for an expense. It's just one of your revenue sources that's going to, be spent towards the overall budget. That is a little over $19.4 million. So it's just an item of revenue utilized for all the expenses the borough has.
Okay. And then do we have a plan to replenish the surplus?
Sure. I mean, the hope is that the current year operations will replenish the surplus, both whatever revenues we realize and whatever prior year budget we didn't utilize that lapses into surplus. But obviously with the current economic times, there's no real way for us to predict exactly how we're going to end up at 12/31/20.
Okay. Right. And I'll just add something to that. If you look at the 10-year history, we were down back in 2010 of only $1.3 million, and that surplus now climbed to 6.2. And I know that I've had conversations with the mayor and certain council members and maybe council as a whole, where we all thought that, we were certainly dangerously low at one point in time with our surplus. And now that surplus has risen to a number that the mayor and council has made a conscious effort that we want to start to reduce that down and bring that number down to a reasonable percentage of your total budget. So I think at one point we were again below where we really wanted to be. And now we're at a point where we know that the number is very healthy, but we're going to start to bring it down. You just don't want to bring it down all in one swoop. But it turns out that was a God bless. In fact, that we were able to generate this surplus and have these reserve balances because I truly believe when we get to 2021 and 2022, we're going to be aggressive on the utilization of surplus again. And then you should be able to sustain yourself at a reasonable level.
Got it. All right. Are we going to be incurring new debt in 2020?
Not that I know of. Lorraine, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, we're definitely going to have some debt authorized with our capital spending, but the amount that we authorize will be less than the amount that we're paying down this year. So at the end of the year, we will have an overall decrease in our debt.
Oh, okay, because that was going to be my next question. Are we increasing debt payments in an effort to pay down more debt? So that would, okay.
Most of our debt is locked in and we cannot pay additionally on them, but we are aggressively paying our note. That's the option available to us.
Right, and I also think that, big picture-wise here, when you look at this particular budget, and certainly one from last year, the amount that's being funded into the Capital Improvement Fund, which is a fund that the borough can utilize to pay improvements and projects with cash on hand, as opposed to some municipalities which just do the minimum amount, which is basically 5% of the authorization, and then they finance everything. We've actually made a conscious effort now to move away from financing everything, because you do that when you have no cash reserves and we're in a situation that's not ideal. Now the cash reserves have increased. So now the idea is to try to move from the large cash reserves and move that in to start to go as a pay-as-you-go for perhaps maybe some of the non-major infrastructure. So when you're doing smaller projects or vehicles or what have you, you could start to get to the point where you're actually paying cash for those and you leave financing for the major infrastructure programs.
Yeah, that was definitely an ongoing effort that the Finance Committee has put forth. In 2016, we were only funding $70,000 towards our capital improvements, and this year we're at $1.2 million. So we've made dramatic strides towards more of a pay-as-you-go capital funding for our finances.
Okay.
Right.
what is the plan for the reserve for, like, is there a plan for the reserve for the uncollected taxes? Because we're going to see an increase in that, correct? As we go through what we're going through right now, maybe not, I mean, I don't know about this year, but maybe next year, I'm guessing this year. So, you know, are we using more of those reserves and allocating them because of the pandemic?
Our actual reserve for uncollected taxes hasn't increased, but our in-house plan for that, knowing that our revenues are going to decrease, we are keeping our department heads on task of not spending any non-essential funding. So as we get through the end of the year, if we are going to have a shortfall or even an actual deficit, which I doubt, but if we do, then we'll have the ability to cancel unspent appropriations to make sure that we do not have a deficit.
Okay. And then my last question is when the budget passes, and I don't know if this is essential work or not essential work, but can we, can the work, because I know that can the work on the baseball fields and the paving start or not yet?
That's more of a council decision as to what you start. The capital funding will be available. We'll have capital ordinances to be introduced at our next regular council meeting. They take two readings. After that, you're ready to go. We have, as I said, 1.2 million in our budget right now for capital funding. So I know that the Finance Committee has talked about getting paving going, but you guys will have to decide what are the capital improvements you want to move forward with right away.
Got it. Thank you.
Jennifer, you will see some paving because we have grant monies. That was the telecom resolution we put on last meeting. That has been deemed essential by DOT and the FTA. So you'll see those projects going on, but that's grant money. That's
grant money. And then the county is paving.
The county's paving. Yep.
609.
Ave. Yep.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So, okay. I just wanted to, all right. Those are all my questions. Thank you very much.
Sure.
More questions?
Ron, you're muted.
Heather Fiore, Windsor Avenue. I just wanted to find out the amount that you allocate for those that don't pay on the tax. I think it was 1.7. Is it normal to have a 13% hold for taxation for those that you may not collect? Roughly 13%. I didn't write down the numbers, so I'm just going based on a broad number.
Sorry, you beeped in and out a couple of times. Were you asking for the reserve for uncollected taxes?
Yes. Is the reserve amount normally around 13%? Or is that increased at all given this particular?
That has not increased this year. It's been at 1.7 million since 2017. It's been that. We normally have, I think, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, around a 99% tax collection rate.
About 98, maybe a little bit less than 98%. It's actually based on a calculation. So what we do is we look at the actual collection rate and then we come up with what do we think we need, and the maximum that we can use on this calculation is the collection rate. We've always been typically about 1 to 1.5% less than we actually have as a collection rate. And what this does, it gives us the ability then, as Ralph had indicated, to make those payments to the school, to the county, and then deal with the non-payment issues. And again, you know, you may think that this is somewhat high, and it's right in line with most other municipalities. But this particular year may serve again as a weather storm where we say, okay, we have this 1% differential between the collection rate and succeeding year calculation difference. But in fact, this could be a year where that 1% doesn't materialize, and we're going to be using that 1.7 million. What isn't used, I will say, drops into surplus as part of the generation process.
How much do we usually use of that 1.7?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's tough to say. I mean, it's based upon the collections, usually around 1% that we don't use, and it goes back through the appropriation side and back into surplus. So it's a regeneration tool again.
Okay, thank you.
More questions? Entertain a motion to bring it back.
So made.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're back.
Mayor, now we need a motion and a second to approve the budget.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Mr. Hoppercamp,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Schindler,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Thank you. We have a budget, and I think it's a pretty good one. And again, there's no tax increase to the public, which is, in these times, I think, significant.
Mike,
Thank you.
if I could just, I want to personally thank the Finance Committee. Lorraine, you're the best in the world. Ralph, thank you for your expertise. Council, this is going to be hard times, so I just want you to know we're circling the wagons, and I just appreciate everybody's support in this. This is a long effort.
Yeah.
It's a very long effort, and I'd like to thank Ron and Lorraine and Brad Hofferkamp for really putting in time, and Mike, obviously. It was a long effort, and I think we have a good budget here, and I think all of us are realizing coming in the next few months there's going to be some belt tightening and some surprises, hopefully not bad ones, but we got to be prepared, and that's the way we're going to look at it, and we got to dance with the music that's playing. So that's it.
And thanks to you, Rich. You should throw yourself in the mix as well.
Yeah.